Hi, and welcome to the podcast of the Korean War with our guests Cabanillas, Quintero, G. Navarro, and our special guest Cesar Loya. So, first, the Korean War was the first major conflict following the end of World War II and the first war of the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. It was fought between North Korea and South Korea through the early part of the 1950s. The North had the support of communist allies, including the Soviet Union and China, while the South had the support of the West with the United States.
In the 3 years of the Korean War, there were leaders that made this war happen. The leaders from America were Dwight Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, Harvey Truman, Edward Almond, and Walton Walker. Now, in the side from Korea, we have Kim Song and Singham Rhee. From China, Mao Zedong and Peng Dehuai. Finally, we have Joseph Stalin from the Soviet Union.
The escalation of tension degenerated into open warfare when North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950. In 1953, the war ended with an armistice that restored the border between the Koreas near the Train 38 parallel and created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, a 4 kilometers wide strip between the two countries.
The causes of the war began after the World War II. In 1945, when Korea was divided into two areas, the US and the Soviet Union agreed that the 38 parallel would border between North and South Korea. The 38 parallel is an imaginary line that follows 38 degrees longitude on the map. The Soviets occupied and controlled North Korea, Americans occupied and controlled South Korea. In 1947, the US tried to reunite Korea by asking the UN General Assembly to supervise a nationwide election. The UN agreed and wanted all foreign troops to withdraw from Korea after a new government was elected and took power. However, North Korea refused to take part in the elections.
There are some consequences of this war. For Korea, it was after the war. North Korea and South Korea remained divided. Families were broken up by the war and lived on opposite sides of the demilitarized zone, unable to visit, even communicate with each other. The impact of the Korean War on the civilian population was especially dramatic. Korean civilian casualties, dead, wounded, and missings, totaled between the 3 or 4 million during the 3 years of war, to 1950 through 1953. North Korea fell into poverty and could not keep up with South Korea's economic pace. For USA, the USA managed to prevent South Korea falling into communism hands, but the fear of the domino theory was to impact on US foreign policy decisions for the next 20 years. The war led to massive American rearmament. Their defense budget shot up to $48 billion in 1951 and $60 billion in 1952. For China and Soviet Union, the war was increased tension between the Soviet Union and China as they squabbled over who should pay the bill for it. In 1960, China broke from the Soviet Union in an event known as the Sino-Soviet split, creating tension amongst all communist powers.
Thanks for that information, Axel. Now, our special guest, Caesar, is going to give us some of the news.
Thank you for inviting me, Alexander. North Korea destroyed the Inter-Korean Liaison Office located in Seoul, reported Southern Unification Ministry. North Korea blew up Kaesong's office at 2:49 p.m. The ministry, which is in charge of our relations between the two Koreas, said in a brief message to the press. Shortly before, the South Korean press agency Yonhap had reported the explosion and intense smoke came out of the industrial complex where this office is located. The symbolic office was set up at the end of 2018 in the North Korea border city of Kaesong as part of the diplomatic rapprochement undertaken that year by the two countries.
Thanks for the news, Caesar. Now, we're going to talk about our conclusions, starting with Cabanillas.
Okay. In conclusion, I think there were a lot of interesting things about these topics, and the thing that interests me the most was how the two greatest superpowers at that time were in danger of having more influence in the other countries, and how all this caused many wars and damage around the world.
In my own conclusion, I can say that I cannot imagine the pain that people go through, having to separate with borders and wars. I believe that little by little we will realize that the war is not the solution.
In conclusion, the Korean War has been viewed as forgotten war by many other nations because it occurred between two serious world conflicts, World War II and Vietnam War. The Korean War aggravated the tensions between global superpowers as they sought to exert their rights to defend their political ideologies of democracy and communism. This led the US to intervene as part of the containment policy, provoked China to enter the war in support of communism in North Korea, and led to the division of the Korean peninsula. Korea has been greatly damaged by the war.
In my conclusion, this war changed the two Koreas, both of them separated. But talking about negative consequences, North Korea had more consequences than South Korea because it began a dictatorship from 1953 to now where their citizens suffered for too many years and they still suffer.
In conclusion, it was so frustrating to live in Korea in those times. As my teammate said, between 1950 and 1953, 2.5 million of people lost their lives, and this is such as an unfortunate situation. Also, it is interesting how the most powerful countries, for example the US and the Soviet Union, wanted to dominate more areas around the globe and give different ideologies to the people.
Hope you enjoy our podcast.